Despite Miami's mediocre record, is there a case to be made that Jimmy Butler, having the best year of his career, should be a MVP candidate? We debate that possibility. Plus, Heat legend Mario Chalmers had some interesting comments on former teammate LeBron James, and we continue the next round of our Heat Culturiest bracket on who has best represented the team throughout its history on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day and for subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. We've got Mario Chalmers stirring things up, and we update our Heat culture bracket later on. But I want to start, David, with the MVP conversation and why we aren't talking enough about Jimmy Butler. Now, to be clear, I don't think Jimmy Butler is the MVP. All right, I'm just going to start with that right out of the gate. But we know it's going to go to Joel Embiid, Nikola Jokic, or Giannis. I'm not really interested in having that debate. We've had it enough. It's going to be those three guys, 1, 2, 3, some order. We know that, all right? But I think it's worth having more of a holistic conversation about this because when voters get their ballots, they're not just picking who wins, right? They're not even just picking the top three. They've got to pick five guys. And maybe in today, we don't really care about, if you're not number one, who really cares? Everything's like all Talladega Nights all of a sudden. If you're not first, you're last. But I actually do think like the top five of any given season is meaningful. I think it's an important honor. I think if you finish 4 or 5 in a given season, that is, I think that's something that you could put on a resume, right? I think that's it's a good snapshot of who the best players, the most dominant players were in any given season when you kind of look back at the history of the league season by season. So
I talk about it with Dwayne Wade all the time. Those 2008 to 2010 years where he was waiting in between eras, between Shaq and LeBron joining him as a teammate. We always point to those 2 seasons and say he was a top 5 player. Didn't win MVP, but he was right up there.
Absolutely, right? And I think Jimmy Butler is having that kind of season where we need to have a real conversation about him at least being in the mix here because, there's a bunch of national outlets like, that do sort of their MVP power rankings. NBA.com has a very popular one. It's called their MVP ladder. And they list like 15 different guys on it. And Jimmy Butler is not among the names listed. And that to me
not among the top 15?
Not among the top 15. I'll just tell you who they are. So the top 3 are the obvious ones. And then you've got Jason Tatum and Luka Doncic at 4 and 5. And those have basically been the 5 guys all year. But Luka, first of all, is injured right now and has been slipping before that. Jason Tatum is in a shooting slump right now. As good as they were at the beginning of the year, I think they deserve to be in the conversation, but I don't think by any stretch have they sort of locked down 4 and 5 on every voter's ballot. Like they should not have. And it might be the easy thing for a voter to do, but I am imploring basically the voters to not just do the easy thing and actually look at some of the other names here. So beyond Tatum and Luka, the next 5 out that NBA.com does, and I kind of like this, it's sort of like the next 5 out on the bubble kind of guys. They've got Domantas Sabonis, Julius Randle, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, James Harden, and Devin Booker, right? All great players having great seasons.
Harden is on there. James Harden is on there. How can you have 2 MVP candidates on the same team?
The 5 next ones that they list, like these are like honorable mentions. Anthony Davis, Kevin Durant, who's played, 40 games all year. De'Aaron Fox, Lauri Markkanen, who we all love Lauri Markkanen, but for MVP, that's crazy. And then Ja Morant. So who's got his own things, but his overall had a very great season. And I don't have any problem with him being sort of an honorable mention here. But the fact to me that Jimmy Butler's not even mentioned is crazy. And is that just because the Heat have been sort of underwhelming, hovering around 500? Is more sort of negativity and confusion around the team than positivity, considering that this was a team that was in the Eastern Conference Finals and the 1 seed in the East last year? I think that's a big part of it. But David, you look at the standings, like,
the Dallas is barely above 500. Like the Heat are better than a few of those teams with players that are on that list. So it has nothing to do with the team's overall record, which is often the response in terms of like, oh, well, that team's not winning. That was the argument against Dwayne, as I just pointed out, 2008, 2010. No, they weren't winning a lot of games. They were above 500, but just barely. Well,
but those teams were like actually bad, though. You know what I mean? And the Heat are not what you wanted them to be, but they're a playoff team. Like, we're talking about still like a team that's going to make the playoffs. Like, we're not talking about the best player on the Houston Rockets when we talk about Jimmy Butler.
Why is Luka exempt from this conversation? Like, I know he's been hurt, but they're one game above 500.
Yeah,
like
they have a worse record than the Miami Heat. The Phoenix Suns have two guys on this list, Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. Now, Kevin Durant, some of that's the Brooklyn stuff that he did, but that's a very confusing thing that we don't need to get into. But the Phoenix Suns record, they're number 4 in the West, but they're 38-33. The Heat are 39-34. For all intents, they have the same record for all intents and purposes, but just because the Suns play in the West and it's a little bit more jumbled, and the Heat play in the East and it's a little bit more top heavy, the Heat are a 7th seed kind of right here in the play-in tournament, and the Suns are the 4 seed in the West. So now the Suns get to have some legit guys. And I know, the other part of it is that the Suns are looked at as legit contenders and the Heat are not. And I have no problem with that. But we're talking about a regular season award here. So I just find it crazy that Jimmy Butler's not on this list at all. And and not just pick on the NBA.com list, you know what I mean? But I haven't seen him mentioned anywhere. And most of the MVP conversation has to do between, it's like Jokic versus Embiid. But voters are going to have to fill out 5 guys, and I really think Jimmy Butler needs to be part of this conversation, and we've got a couple of weeks to make that happen.
I still think if it hasn't happened by now, if there's no buzz about his name, I don't think it's likely to happen anytime soon.
Let's get the buzz going. That's what we're doing here.
No doubt. I don't know how to shift that conversation because it seems like the goalposts are constantly moving in terms of promoting who your preferred candidate would be. Well, he's missed a lot of games and he hasn't, or he's played and put up this kind of numbers and he hasn't. Like, again, we're talking about Luka Doncic. Great player. No one would dispute that. Puts up big points, doesn't play defense worth a damn, whatever. That doesn't really matter, right? So in some cases, he still puts up big numbers and he helps carry that team to victory. He's got a bad roster. Well, guess what? Jimmy's playing or has played alongside multiple undrafted players over the course of the season. Doesn't he get some kind of consideration for that? So I don't know what the criteria are, which is why I've always had a problem with this award. Exactly. Yeah. Nobody does. And you know what he needs? He needs like a smattering at the very least of 50-point games over the course of the season. That's it. Or maybe a 40-point game,
I'm telling you, I don't think that voters are doing the homework right now, nor should they, by the way, for like 4th and 5th. Like, just wait until the ballots are due. Let as many games get played as can be played before you make any of your decisions. So I have no problem with that. But I'm telling you, when these voters start looking at the numbers, the advanced stats, the counting stats, whatever it is, like Jimmy Butler's name is just going to come up. So I have some stats for you. And that to me is what I think is going to get Jimmy Butler in this conversation. If he does, is that his advanced stats are unavoidable, right? They're unavoidable. He's on all the tops of all these lists. So here are the stats that I got. I'll start with just the raw stats. Jimmy Butler this year, 22.7 points per game on 53% shooting, 6.1 rebounds, 5.1 assists, 1.9 steals, which is 3rd in the NBA. All right. He's got a 64% true shooting percentage. True shooting percentage measures 3-pointers, 2-pointers, and free throws. 64% true shooting. That's better than Giannis. It's better than Tatum. It's better than Luka. It's right about the same as Joel Embiid. Okay. Like, that's just a fact. That's there. He's played 1,932 minutes this year. That's less than Jokic, Tatum, and Luka, but it's more than Giannis. It's more than James Harden. It's more than Devin Booker. It's about the same again as Joel Embiid. We could go advanced stats. So like a bunch of different sites kind of have these holistic things that kind of power rank the best players in the league in a given season. So 538, for example, has their Raptor statistic, which factors in a whole bunch of other box scores and
he's top
things
10.
Like that. He's 5th. He's 5th. Estimated plus minus. He's 3rd. Estimated wins contributed. Jimmy Butler is 6th. Box plus minus, which is the basketball reference one that is widely used. Jimmy Butler is 4th. This isn't some guy. This is not a stretch. He is by every holistic stat that is valued when voters do their homework. He's top 5 in literally all of them. And you look at those advanced stats, those holistic stats, Jimmy Butler ranks better than SGA, better than Julius Randle, better than James Harden, better than Domantas Sabonis, better than Devin Booker. All the guys on the MVP ladder, Jimmy Butler, outside of like the top guys, Jimmy Butler is better than all of them in these holistic stats. His EPM is 3rd behind just Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, who are vying for neck and neck for number 1. His estimated plus minus, which is a really great stat, I think. He's third by a margin. So when people start doing their homework, they're going to see Jimmy Butler at the top of these lists. And I just hope that their eyes don't just skip him over.
That's a huge assumption, though. That's a huge assumption that they even do their homework. I don't get a ballot. I think some voters do. A lot of voters
I think
don't.
It's better than what it used to be.
Maybe. I still think you're getting a lot of people who go with their gut. And the feeling, again, is that the conversation's already been fleshed out. I remember earlier in the season, it was a two-man race between Jokic and Doncic. And, of course, I was at a point in time when Embiid had missed a significant number of games, and we weren't sure whether or not his long-term viability for the season was unclear. Giannis was, on an okay Milwaukee team that was kind of lower the rankings.
Got out of the gate slow.
Yeah. And then Tatum had this incredible start to the season.
Steph was involved before he got hurt. Yeah.
That's right. So it's fluctuated over the course of the season, but Jimmy's name has never been in there. And I think that's the best question to ask, though. Is like, why is it?
Well,
and that's
because he's having his best stretch right now, right? Like,
right.
I have no problem with Steph being in the conversation and then not, because he got hurt. And now he's out of the conversation. But before he got hurt, he was playing as people had him number one. And look, I don't think that we should be even having MVP talks 20 games into the season. That's a little ridiculous unto itself. But Jimmy Butler's having his best stretch right now, and he might be playing his way into this. And again, I'm not advocating that he should be the MVP of the league. He is not, okay? But 4 and 5 should be wide open. Number 1 through 3 is a lock. We know the top 3 guys, right? It's just in whatever order you figure it out. But 4 and 5 ought to be wide open, and Jimmy Butler should at least be on the short list when voters are going to do their homework and they're talking. Even your gut, like, Jimmy Butler's been playing great lately, and I think that's been national news, right? Like, people have understood that he's playing great, and so I do think that, I don't know, like, again, there's no way to predict what the voters are going to do, but if they do their homework, and I'm not saying all of them do, but if 50% of these voters do their homework, they're going to see Jimmy Butler at the top of all these lists, these rankings, these stats, and they're going to have to ask themselves, is this somebody that I should consider? And that's the thing that I at least hope they ask themselves that question, and they don't just kind of skip over naturally Jimmy Butler's name and just.
Do you want to carry this conversation over into the next?
We
segment?
Probably should. Well, let's do that, and then we'll talk about our old friend Mario Chalmers stirring things up.
He legend Mario Chalmers. But before we do that, just a reminder that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The tournament is heating up. Go Canes! And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's a bonus bet back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, number of threes drained. Can the Heat shoot above 40% again for the rest of the season? You can place a wager on that on FanDuel. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Locked On Heat is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please do subscribe. We'll get to Mario Chalmers here in a second, but just wanted to continue along this Jimmy Butler conversation.
Listen, I love that we're bringing this up. We've had this episode last week too, where we talked about him having his historically great season, perhaps the best season of his career. We talked with Rowan Nutkearney of Sports Illustrated about why the coverage regarding Jimmy has been so negative of late. And I don't know. I would love to say that we have the kind of influence over media voters where he should be considered a top 5 player this season. And that's what we're saying basically, is that he's been between a number 5 and 10 best individual player this season. And I think that's fair. I don't think that's ludicrous when you say it out loud like that. And yet it just remains impossible for voters to consider. And it's just, it is a bias. And I've never really thought that there is a bias exists against Miami, but it's pretty clear in the way the team is covered. No national TV games to speak of. The kind of, look, in a world where you can have 2 MVP candidates and multiple Defensive Player of the Year candidates on the same team, somehow Jimmy's abilities get discounted, his production gets discounted because, well, he's being led by a Hall of Fame coach in Eric Spoelstra, who again has never been considered for Coach of the Year for some reason.
Right. And well, he was considered last year. I mean, that was a little bit, he's been considered, but
has he? I mean, yeah, I guess realistically.
He's been considered, but No, I mean, I think the other thing with Jimmy is that people think of him as a playoff player, not a regular season player, and kind of rightly so. Like, I don't think if Jimmy Butler, put it this way, if the Heat aren't on the edge, kind of teetering in playoff position here, I don't think Jimmy Butler is playing the way he is now. He's kind of gone like 90% playoff Jimmy, right?
We talked about
to try, right. And so if playoff Jimmy isn't engaged in regular season games, he's not doing what he's doing now and playing himself into the conversation. And so I think people view Jimmy Butler as a guy who kind of saves it for the postseason, and you don't really consider him for regular. He wasn't an all-star, right? And I'm not saying he should have been necessarily an all-star, but he wasn't, because people just don't look at him that way. But I almost think that if the Heat end up at the 6th seed, then maybe there's going to be a push. Like, oh my gosh, the Heat got out of the play-in tournament. Like, that's the only way I can really see Jimmy Butler getting any kind of representation in terms of being on this list. And look, I just want him to be in it. I just want him to be on the top. Like, he should be over Anthony Davis, who barely has played this year. Like, I just want him to be on these lists. And it's just, that's the thing that's so weird to me, is to not even be in the top 15 on something like this is crazy to me.
It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Look, there's a great thread, and this is a conversation for another day, perhaps, but there's a great thread by our friend Cooper Moorhead of Heat.com about why Bam Adebayo is not just a legitimate, but probably a very good candidate to be Defensive Player of the Year. Like, his minutes production, like his defense, the things that he does well, etc. I mean, you can go check it out on Twitter if you like. And yet, I still think he's just not seen that way. Like, the favorite, the buzz, Jaren Jackson Jr., fine defender. Nobody's taking that away from him. Statistically, Bam is better. It's
in some statistics, Bam?
Yeah. What was the argument against Bam last year? Hadn't played enough games. Well, guess how many minutes Jaren Jackson Jr.
Bam's played the games this year. Yeah. It's crazy.
This year, Jaren Jackson Jr. has played as many minutes as Bam did last year, and yet there's already plenty of buzz about Jaren as a legit Defensive Player of the Year, if not the leading candidate for Defensive Player of the Year.
So you think that there's an inherent?
It just feels like there is a bias, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe. All right.
Not sure why Heat players get discredited as widely as they do. Again, last year Jimmy was putting up big numbers on the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. Oh, it's just Spo making the most he's got available to him. All these other players stepping up. Nobody's particularly good enough. Well, and yet somehow they win 50+ games. Now they're struggling to be a few games over 500. Jimmy's putting up MVP type numbers. It's like, well, is he really? I mean, they're just barely 500. So, like, this moving of the goalposts, it's hard to quantify it as any other way.
Well, I do think
to be this kind of wide acceptance or acceptance of what Miami does.
Every year is different. So I don't know that it's necessarily moving the goalposts. So I'll push back on that a little bit, just because every year is different, because every year is literally different. And so the factors have to change with the changing seasons. But I do get what you're saying overall in terms of, like, okay, games played mattered, now it doesn't. Like, all these things.
Right.
I'm with you. I'm with you there 100%. I do think that Bam is actually in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year more than Jimmy Butler's in the mix for MVP. I'm just saying more than Jimmy.
That's fine.
Like,
by your own point, like, Jimmy's not even a top 15.
Yeah.
Like Jimmy's not even a top 15 candidate according to NBA.com. Like James Harden cannot be an MVP candidate alongside another MVP candidate. Like, that's just statistically impossible. And there's not taking away from what Harden does as a point guard and playmaker and everything else. And he's maybe more effective and efficient than a lot of people expected him to be. His defense is still pretty porous. Nobody seems to care about that.
I mean, James Harden, he's having a great year for Philly, but to your point, he's on a team with another MVP. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the Thunder are fun, they're good, but they're a play-in tournament team at the best. Like, at best, that's what we're talking about. Like, Sabonis has been having a great year. I have no problem with him. Like, I think Sabonis and Jimmy Butler, those are guys that should be in the mix for 4 and 5, along with Tatum and Luka. I'm not saying Tatum and Luka should not be in the mix. They were amazing to start the season, and the start of the season is just as important as the end of the season when you're talking about regular season awards. So I have no problem with that. But
why not Donovan Mitchell? Like, he's carrying a Cleveland team to a top 4 seed, top 5 seed.
71-point game. Like, there's just I'm not really sure what's going on, but I do want to at least try to get the conversation started, at least here, at least locally, that Jimmy Butler, the push for him to get on an MVP ballot, that should exist. And I hope that when the voters kind of look at this stuff, they're going to see Jimmy Butler's name and at least just go, maybe. That's all I want, because we're not even getting the maybe part right now. Let's move on to Mario Chalmers, who's in the news saying that he wanted to take Ray Allen's shot at the end of Game 6 of the 2013 finals. He said he would have made it. He's out here saying that he called LeBron the B word during a game. I'm not really sure why Chalmers is doing all these interviews right now, if he's promoting something or whatever, something like that. But David, what did you make of Mario Chalmers' comments?
I find it a little interesting. The shot, of course, we knew that he would be willing to take the shot. That's what got him here in the first place, that incredible irrational confidence. But the trashing of LeBron, like, I think what really stood out to me the most about his comments was the fact that he said that nobody around the league is scared of playing LeBron. And I think that's incredible, because he witnessed LeBron at the peak of his powers when he was a 2-time MVP in a 4-year span with the Miami Heat, where he was inarguably the best player in the league. You could say whatever you want to about Derrick Rose and Dwight Howard or anybody else, but LeBron was the best player in the league over that 4-year span. And yet somehow that nobody was scared of playing him. And I wonder what that perception is, if he's not viewed as ruthlessly as perhaps Kobe Bryant or certainly Michael Jordan in his heyday.
I didn't buy that because based on everything about LeBron, people were not like scared of LeBron's presence, I don't think, because everything we know in Miami and then in other places, like he's a fun kind of guy. He's kind of a light point in a locker room. Like teammates say, he's a great joker and all. Like the opposite of Michael Jordan, who like you just didn't want to be around based on the stories, right? You just didn't even want to be around him. And that was not LeBron. So maybe that's more of what Mario Chalmers was talking about in terms of nobody was scared of LeBron, but people were scared to face LeBron in the same way that I think the PGA Tour was scared of Tiger Woods at Tiger's peak. It was basically like, it's Tiger versus the field, it's LeBron versus the field. And so I think that there was something there. I mean, LeBron owned the Eastern Conference for a decade. I mean, he was totally in the heads of Toronto, the DeMar DeRozan, Kyle Lowry teams. Like there's a lot of stuff there, but I don't know, man. I love all of it. I love that Mario Chalmers is just out here. Like, who you haven't heard from in a long time? Me, Mario Chalmers, the real GOAT. And he's just like, here's my opinions on LeBron and why I wasn't scared of him and why I was calling him the B word. By the way, I should have taken the shot, the greatest shot of all time. That should have been me. And I love that the interviewers brought out the photo of him in the corner with his hands up. Yeah. And the only guy who was unhappy in that arena when Ray Allen made that shot, sounds like it was Mario Chalmers, because he saw Ray Allen's shot go.
He probably went up to Chris Bosh afterwards. He probably went up to Chris Bosh and said, "You made a wrong pass. After that rebound, you throw it to me. I'll hit that shot, not Ray."
Right.
Not one of the best shooters of all time. No.
It's great. I love Mario Chalmers. If Mario Chalmers, if you want to do more interviews, come on to Locked On Heat, man. Like absolutely. That'll be a week-long session. Yeah. Speaking of Mario Chalmers, he's going to make an appearance in our Heat Culture bracket. Not today, though. We're going to get appearances by Dwayne Wade and Eric Spoelstra when we update the bracket next. This is Locked On Heat. Reach Locked On Heat on Twitter, Instagram, email us, lockedonheat@gmail.com. Let's update the Heat Culture bracket, in which the person who represents Heat Culture the most moves on. Last week, Pat Riley and Goran Dragic advanced easily. Andy Ellisberg upset LeBron, and Shaq got the upset over Chris Bosh. Surprising one there. Let's see. That was all me. Let's see what we have today. Our first matchup: 5 seed Dwayne Wade versus 28 seed Sherman Douglas. We all know D Wade here, David, but why don't you speak to Sherman Douglas's case?
Known as the Little General, not a very long stint with the Heat General, one of the earlier picks there. Kind of known as being a little burly, a little gruff. Didn't shy away from the physicality. He was a different kind of point guard back then. Again, more of the floor general, but a little bit more physical. Just a guy who helped define a team that really lacked any sort of identity at the time. And he was traded to the Boston Celtics, wound up killing Miami a couple times during those 80s matchups there. Again, that was a long time ago. Early 90s matchups too. He was a good player during a time that I think a lot of younger Heat fans certainly don't even know existed. But he had a little swag to him too, and it was culture-y at a time when there wasn't any real culture no offense to Ron Rothstein or Kevin Lockery or any of those early coaches for the Heat, but he was certainly he didn't play for Pat Riley. He was never here when Riley really helped develop the culture for the first time. So this is an easy landslide victory for Dwayne.
It's D-Wade. But just it was nice to revisit the Sherman Douglas thing. D-Wade being a 5 seed, do you have any issue with that?
Well, it depends. I mean, I can't remember exactly how the other top 4 seeds shake out. I mean, look, we're seeing some upsets in the tournament. I don't see any reason why Dwayne couldn't climb his way.
We've got Pat, UD, Spo, and Alonzo, I think, in some order, are the top 4 seeds, if I'm remembering off the top of my head here. So I think Dwayne Wade, if he never left for Chicago and had that half year in Cleveland, easily a top 4 seed, but he did.
Can't do that because Alonzo left also. He left as a free agent, so
I guess
can't use that argument. Yeah, it's a very different.
But he's now an owner for the Jazz while Alonzo's still with the Heat.
Because he doesn't have any other options.
Sorry, D-Wade. You get bumped to the 5 seed. I'm going to have a hard time not voting for D-Wade, but you're right. He advances. All right. Our next matchup, 21 seed Caron Butler versus 12 seed Anthony Carter. So a couple of current assistant coaches and pretty good Heat role players in their day facing off here together.
This is a tough one. A very tough one. I like the Caron pick. He was only here for a couple of years, but considering his past,
tough juice.
Everything everybody considers about UD and his upbringing. I mean, if you need to get a refresher course on Caron's early adolescence, very, very difficult life. He was as tough as it gets. I love just the memory of him crying as he was eventually selected 10th in that draft. He slipped a little bit after coming out from UConn and just getting drafted by the Miami Heat and loving this organization so much at a point in time when they were, again, lacking a little bit of identity. Alonzo going through his kidney issues.
The year before D-Wade got drafted.
Yeah, the season before. He was only here for 2 years. He was there that year before Dwayne, the year after Dwayne. Yeah, and then he was included in that trade for Shaq in 2004. So always been a part of Heat culture, always loved speaking about Heat culture. It helped define him as a player who wound up having really good careers, in Washington, Dallas, etc.
I remember talking with him. He spent, I think it was just the one season in Sacramento. And this was the first Kings game I ever covered over at the old Sleep Train Arena. And I got to talk, and Caron was just like riding the bench at that point in his career. And
he's a vet on the end of the roster.
And the Heat were in town. And so I was living in Northern California at the time, and I made the hour trip north to go cover that Heat Kings game. And I remember talking to guys like D-Wade and UD about Caron Butler as a teammate. And the whole story was just about Caron Butler being a great teammate and how much of a veteran presence he was helpful for with that young Kings team. Turns out he was not helpful at all because the Kings still didn't make the playoffs. But that was
overcome Vlade Divac, man. There's only so much you can do.
But the way people talked about Caron, I mean, he is oozing Heat culture. It's not a surprise that he made his way back to the organization soon after retiring, and he's now on that bench. Ditto for Anthony Carter, man. Like, we don't hear stories about Anthony Carter, but people love him. People love him.
Undrafted guy. Like, he is part of Heat culture, like in the way that a lot of people perceive it now. An undrafted guy who worked his way up there, was a playoff starter in a lot of those Knicks battles. Good backup point guard to Tim Hardaway, too. Like, he was a tough defender, always made the right play. And perhaps his biggest assist ever was his agent not signing his extension in time in 2004. In 2003, which allowed them to sign Lamar Odom with the suddenly freed up cap space. So I'm sure AC doesn't like talking about that because it cost him several millions and millions of dollars, but he helped Miami get Lamar Odom in 2003. And then eventually Lamar was able to help acquire Shaquille O'Neal in 2004. So
spoiler alert, Lamar Odom, not part of the Heat culture bracket. Didn't make the top 32. Unfortunately. So according to Twitter, our Twitter polls had Dwayne Wade winning by a landslide. 96% of people voted for Dwayne Wade. 4% voted for Sherman Douglas. I guess those are Twitter trolls. We had 87% of people voting for Caron Butler over Anthony Carter. Ooh. Do you have Caron advancing here? Not sure why he's a 21 seed and Anthony Carter's a 12 seed. Not sure how that works.
I don't know. Again, man, that's a tough one.
Should we let the listeners break the tie then? Just go with Caron?
No, I have to go with Caron. Yeah, I think he feels the Heat culture more.
Yep. You know? All right. Next matchup. 13 seed Shane Battier versus 20 seed Brian Grant. So we have Brian Grant, early 2000s Miami Heat. Shane Battier, early, the big three era.
Right, 2 years or 3 years there from 2011 to 2014. 3 seasons, 2 championships, 3 trips to the finals. Stayed on as a front office exec for a long time. And the thing that kind of I'm skewing towards Brian Grant personally.
I thought you would.
I just think that Shane was Shane wherever he went, and he was a big part of the Houston organization. He's a big part of Duke. He's a big part of Detroit basketball and just the city's identity because he's from that area. Like he is an entity unto himself. As much as he fit into Heat culture, I don't think he helped define it. Whereas Brian Grant was just this great worker who was not supposed to play the role that he did when he was acquired. He was supposed to play alongside Alonzo Mourning. He wound up replacing Alonzo Mourning, who of course could not play because of a kidney issue, playing undersized. Never forget the quote from Yao Ming, who's saying after being guarded in a win over the heavily favored Houston Rockets, that Brian Grant clawed his back up like a tiger, just again feisty, outplaying like bigger players, just doing everything he could to help promote Heat culture. They weren't winning a lot of games during that span, so it's hard to kind of overlook what Brian.
Well, they went to the playoffs while he was playing center that first year with Dwayne Wade.
Yeah, they sure did. So yeah, I mean,
he was a big part of it. That was a top 5, probably even more than that, Heat team for me of all time.
Top three.
That might be top 3. Yeah. I was ready to go with Shane Battier. 82% of the audience is going with Shane Battier. My argument for Shane Battier was that he kind of was doing the little things on those big 3 teams that those Heat teams needed, and also Badioki. Those were my 2 arguments.
Didn't consider the Badioki.
But you kind of sold me on Brian Grant.
Nice.
If you want to go Brian Grant, I'll go Brian Grant, and we'll go against.
I'm going Brian Grant.
All right, Brian Grant advances. Good job. 20 seed Brian Grant over 13 seed Shane Battier. All right, final matchup of the day. 29 seed Glenn Rice versus 4 seed Eric Spoelstra.
I've got one jersey in my closet. It's a Glenn Rice. I think I was pissed off at Pat Riley. Still I am, after having traded Glenn G Money Rice in '95 to acquire Alonzo Mourning. I always I think I've recalled on the show a couple of times a drunken adventure in Coconut Grove one night long ago, and seeing Glenn Rice walking with his former wife Christina and accusing him, or just coming up to him and say, "You got to join the Heat. You got to join the Heat." And he's like, yeah, we're working on it, and bummed out that it never happened. So I always thought that there was a reunion there. Now he's part of the front office. He's always going to be defined by Heat culture, I think. And yet, come on. Spoisms, like you don't get Heat culture without Eric Spoelstra.
He's a tough break in the bracket for Glenn Rice, who looks like Wesley Snipes in Blade in this photo, by the way.
High top fade. You can't go against it.
Yeah, Spo moves on easily. 97% of the audience went with Spo over Glenn
Burn
Rice.
Nothing
against Glenn Rice, but it's Eric. It's Eric Spoelstra. It's tough to debate him and take him down. All right, that'll do it for our Heat culture bracket update. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Now make your second listen Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. David, thanks for joining me.
Shout out to Glenn Rice.